Hello guys and gals, it's Soulfax here and you're watching another War Thunder video, and this video is basically just a continuation from the last video that I uploaded called War Thunder Why I Quit Ground Forces. Now the reason why I'm making this video is very simple, but before I say that I just want to say thank you for the support on the last video because it's amazing. 650 views and 48 likes on a video. That ratio of views to likes is just amazing. Also, I got 7 subscribers from this video, so it's just even more amazing. Thank you for all the support, guys. I love you. Anyhow, moving on. The reason why I'm making this video is basically, well, there's this thing I do after I upload a video. I post about it on various sites that concern War Thunder. In particular here, I posted it on 3 different sites. On the official subreddit for War Thunder, on the official forum of War Thunder, and on the live.warthunder page that is specifically made for people like me to want to showcase their user-made content. Anyhow, after 2.5 hours, this video, the posts that I made about this video on live.warthunder and on the official forum were deleted. Now, on the live.warthunder page, the post was outright deleted without any explanation or without any notice or any notification that the post was actually deleted. I had to search for it in my post history just to see that it is completely gone. On the official subreddit, excuse me, not on the official subreddit, on the official forum, the thread was locked and the video was deleted from the original post. Now, I got an explanation for that. You're going to see that in just a few seconds. And basically what this guy said is that my video did not inspire enough discussion and that my biased rant video, subjective biased rant, was not good enough for this subreddit and he wanted to delete it. What actually got on my nerves is what he said later in the personal conversation when I'm going to disclose with you. He basically said something along the lines that if I just formatted the title of my post differently, it doesn't sound so conclusive and final. If I actually added a few constructive criticism, few notes and few suggestions for the developer team in the video, that he wouldn't delete my video because it would be good enough content to spark some discussion. And that's what I'm actually going to do here. I'm going to use the last video that I uploaded and I'm just going to add some constructive criticism to it. So let's get right to it. Since I was kind of forced to redo this video, I needed to get some more Ground Forces gameplay because I will be talking about Ground Forces gameplay. And that's very ironic because the sole purpose of the first video was to illustrate in words why I'm not playing Ground Forces anymore. So if your plan was to actually get me to play Ground Forces again, you win, Gaijin Administrator, you win. But anyhow, let's talk about the things that I wanted to talk about. So I'm gonna start laying in some constructive criticism. I want to talk about 3 things at first. So firstly, I want to talk about the maps that we currently have in Ground Forces. All of the maps. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just the trends that I see in some of the maps. Secondly, I want to talk about the respawn system in both Ground Forces Simulator battles and Ground Forces Realistic battles. And lastly, I want to talk about the in-game game mode. So not the Simulator Realistic battle and arcade game modes, but the objectives that you have within each match of Ground Forces. So firstly, I want to talk about the game modes, and you cannot talk about the game modes in Ground Forces without talking about the maps. So first off, let me just get this out of the way. In my opinion, the game modes in War Thunder are just so completely unimaginatively done, lazy and counterintuitive. Firstly, I mean, okay, you drive your tank around and then you need to park it inside of an imaginary, unimportant cap circle, and then you sit there and then some magical number starts sticking above your head, and sooner or later you win the game by just holding this cap point for more time. Now there's a few actual game modes in War Thunder. One being domination, the other one being, I don't know what it's called, a break or something along those lines. They're not very important because they're very clear as to why you need to do. That is one of the only good things about these game modes. Everything else is, in my opinion, very bad because they're very lazily done. I mean, it's the easiest thing that Gaijin could have done is what they did do. They just placed some random ass circles on the map that you need to park your tank in to win the game, and in my opinion that is very boring because the most fun that I've had playing War Thunder was in those historical events in air simulator battles, Flight of the Swallows for example, where a couple of Messerschmitt 262s are trying to take down B-17s and B-29s, and just a whole bunch of P-51s are trying to defend those bombers. When you engage the player with some certain objective that is interesting and fun, and when you actually give them some reason to do it, not just some arbitrary reason like if you sit in this cap point you will win, In my opinion, that is just stupid. And now we come to the point to the maps. I mean, the maps and the game modes really just don't work because, well, as I told you in the previous video and in a few videos that I've already done, not all tanks are made equal and not all tanks are the same. A lot of the tanks are not very good in these kind of city maps like I'm just playing in currently. The Tiger 1 being a prime example of that. Tiger 1 was designed for long range combat. In close range combat, even a T-34-76 can penetrate its side armor very easily, and even with its APCR rounds can penetrate its frontal armor. But at long range, a Tiger 1 is a complete beast and completely unpenetrable, and it can put its awesome gun to work. But when you put it in a cramped environment like this map right here, the Stalingrad map, is one of the biggest offenders when it comes to cramped environments. There is absolutely no way to fight at range to effectively defend your cap point or defend the various cap points put on the map. And trying to stay at range, you really need to get in close quarters, and this is where the whole game modes part of War Thunder Ground Forces falls apart, because like I said, not all tanks are good at close quarters combat, and when you have one nation that is distinctly better than any other nation in close quarters combat, and yes, I'm talking about Russia, the whole thing falls apart, because when you're forcing a Tiger 1 to come in close quarters, you're taking out all the advantages that the Tiger 1 has over the IS-1, the IS-2, and the T-34-85, and you're forcing the German players to play in an environment which they're not suited for, and that's, to me, just sounds very lazy and very wrong. To expand further upon this, the current way that the game objectives, so the cap points, are positioned on certain maps and the structure of the maps themselves are not very sensical to me, because some of the maps clearly benefit one of the other nations, and the cap points do not accommodate the fact that one nation is better at close combat and the other nation is better at long range combat. So let's take Poland for an example. So in Poland, when you have the normal 3 cap point setup, one of the cap point is in the town, so closer to the edge of the town. The other cap point, the A cap point, is closer to the other edge of the town, and the only cap point that is outside of some sort of urban close quarters combat area is the B cap point that is on the other side of the river. Now that wouldn't be such a big of a problem if capturing the cap point isn't one of the most instrumental ways to win the game. Having the cap point positions like this on the map like Poland, you're kind of forcing the player to choose between two alternatives. So let's say that you're in a Tiger 1. You can either go into the town and try to fight your way through the horde of T-34-85s that are definitely going to be in town, because that's where they're best at close quarters, where they can outmaneuver the enemy and where their cannons do the most damage and have the most penetration. Or you can flank around the map and try to provide supporting fire. But by doing that, you're surrendering the cap point toward the enemy, and in the hope that either your team is going to be able to capture the cap point for you while you're trying to provide supporting fire, or that you will be able to retake the cap points by getting in a better position, taking out the enemy, and then going into the cap circle and capturing it. Couple that with the fact that most of the maps that we have in Ground Forces War Thunder are very close quarters based, and they're just basically shooting galleries with a lot of cover in them. And when you have a tank that is much more suited for long range combat, like any of the tanks on any nations that are not suited for close range combat, you're basically going to have a very hard time and going to be at a disadvantage if you happen to not get in, let's say, Kursk or Mozdok or one of the new desert maps. If you get on a map that is like Stalingrad, you're going to have a very bad time unless you play very smartly and try very hard. This doesn't just affect Germany, this affects every nation in the game, because every nation in the game has tank destroyers, and tank destroyers do not work in urban environment. Because with a tank destroyer, you need to always have your gun and your frontal armor pointing towards the enemy, and in an urban environment you cannot be sure where your enemy is going to come from. So when you get a tank like the Hetzer or a tank like the Su-85 in a map like the Stalingrad map, or like Advance on Rhine and any other of those just completely close quarters map, you're gonna have a very bad time, because you cannot abuse the fact that your tank has very good, well, decent frontal armor at range and a very good cannon, and that it's relatively mobile. But you will get abused by the fact that your enemies do have turrets and can easily outmaneuver you and catch your sides or your back. Most of the maps are best played in medium tanks that are very mobile, have a very good top speed, have a nice turret traverse and bouncy armor, and when you're not in one of those tanks, you're not gonna have a very good time unless you're a very good player and know the map very well and how to flank your enemies. Now, one of the ways to actually fix this, the cases where you get the wrong tank for the wrong map, is to actually give us a map selection screen. where you can select a map or multiple maps that you might want to play on before you actually queue in for a match. That would fix all of those issues, but that would lead to situations where just most of the players would usually either play on, I would believe, the most popular map would be either Mozdok or Poland, and most of the other maps like Advance on Rhine, like Stalingrad, like Finland, like the forest, Rudgen Forest, whatever it's called, would be just barely played on and would be left for nothing, for dead. They would be completely dead maps. But another way to fix this would be to actually stop forcing the players to engage in close quarters combat and designing the maps to fit close quarters combat, because I don't know why they keep forcing close quarters combat, because this game is definitely not designed with close quarters combat in mind, and when you're in close quarters combat, all the flaws in the game's engine, the hit reg, the ballistics, and all the other problems with the game just get completely magnified, and I don't know why they're doing that. It's just completely nonsensical to me. The city maps that we have and the close quarters maps that we have in War Thunder are not designed for War Thunder, they're designed for World of Tanks. And because this game is not World of Tanks and it's miles away from World of Tanks when it comes to speed of the game, when it comes to the mechanics of the game, how the tanks work and how do they drive and how do they feel, it just doesn't work very well. And that's one of the things that Gaijin needs to understand. This game is not World of Tanks, and if you try and keep trying to force these stupid standards that World of Tanks has set on this, I don't know, niche industry, if that's how you can call it, you're not going to have a very good game on your hands after a few years of just forcing close quarters combat and close quarters maps down the player's throat. You're going to have a lot of angry players that are seeing that you're not using this game toward its fullest potential, but just trying to copy another game that is very successful and trying to be successful off its success. That's a very difficult word. That's a very weird sentence that I just said. Anyhow, moving on to some other stuff. So the next topic of discussion is going to be a big one. Firstly, I will talk about the spawning system in this game and how the respawning system works in both simulator and realistic battles. I'm not going to touch upon arcade battles, because in arcade battles, it's all black and white. You get 3 respawns no matter what vehicle you choose to respawn, and then you can also use aircrafts after you get some kills and stuff like that. So that is all, in my opinion, the arcade system, spawning system, is very good for ground forces. I'm going to talk about only the realistic and simulator battle, and the next topic is also a biggie. I'm going to be talking about the balance in this game and what's wrong with the current balance, and of course I will be touching upon the thing that I've touched upon in a lot of videos, and it's called the Russian bias. So let's get this right out of the way. Russian bias, in my opinion, like I mentioned in the last video, is a thing, but what you don't understand is what I mean by Russian bias when I say Russian bias. Russian bias is a combination of a lot of things, and after further consideration, I made a video a few months back where I talked about Russian bias, and I said that Gaijin is purposely rigging this game so that the Russians have the advantage by changing game mechanics, giving them lower battle rating, and just basically overall rigging the game. And after I've played this game for a couple of more months, I think that's not the case. I changed my opinion. They're not purposely rigging the game, they're just completely and utterly incompetent at grasping cause and effect. When you change one thing, another thing is going to be affected by that change. When you nerf one vehicle, another vehicle might fill that hole of that vehicle that you nerfed and might become better than the original vehicle that you wanted to nerf that you thought was overpowered. And that's exactly what Gaijin doesn't understand, that if you change one thing, another thing will inevitably be affected by that original change. So the first example of Gaijin's incompetence to grasp the cause and effect of their own actions is when they introduced the American Tank Destroyer line in, I think it was patch 1.53 or something along those lines. Really doesn't matter what patch exactly it was. I'm talking more specifically about the M18 Hellcat. When the M18 Hellcat was introduced, it was an awesome vehicle. It had the speed needed to outmaneuver most of the German tanks, in particular the Tiger and the Panther, and it had the gun to compete with those tanks at range, so it could flank them effectively and then harm them by hitting them, by penetrating them and killing them. What Gaijin did, they nerfed the tank to oblivion. Now, the tank was, I would say, just slightly overpowered. It was very good, but the thing is, it was too easy to use because it was both very fast and very mobile, and it had an awesome gun that did a lot of damage when it penetrated. Now, Gaijin decided to do something very strange. They took the two things that were very good with the M18, the mobility, the top speed, and the cannon performance, and they nerfed both of those things, making the M18 just a mediocre tank. And that happened in, I don't know, 1.3. That was the only time that that the USA had anything to counter the Tiger-Panther combo. That was the only time that the USA was actually competitive at 5.7, and sometimes even beyond, because the penetration and the post-penetration effect of the M18 were so good that it can actually go up to 6.7, providing that it can effectively flank the enemy. But what I'm trying to say is Gaijin decided to nerf both greatest things about this vehicle without realizing that if they nerf both of those things, they're going to make the tank so bad that it's not going to be able to compete anymore, rendering it, I wouldn't say completely useless, but eliminating any advantage it had over the enemy. Another example would be a couple of months back, around 6, 7 to 8 months back. I really don't know how much time has passed, but around the same time that Gaijin introduced the American tank destroyer line, they decided to nerf the cannon that is present on the Panzer IV F2, and the cannon was given, it was a very good cannon. It really performed amazingly. It was the best cannon at its battle rating. It could penetrate anything that it was facing frontally, and if you shoot at center of mass through the front plate of T-34s and KV-1s, it would usually one-shot them, and granted, it was a little bit overpowered, it needed slight adjustment. But what they didn't understand is when they nerfed the cannon into the ground, where instead of one-shotting things through the front plate, it would bounce on the front plate and maybe penetrate the turret of things, not reliably disabling them so you can put another shot into them. They didn't understand that the same cannon is used 1.0 battle rating higher and a whole tier higher on the Panzer IV, on all the Panzer IVs after the Panzer IV F2. What they did is, instead of nerfing something on that specific cannon, they decided to nerf the whole line of cannons that is derived from that same cannon, and made it so that tanks that are supposed to fight much heavier opponents like the KV-85, the IS-1, and last but not least the T-34-D5s don't have the firepower needed to fight them because one tank at one battle rating was slightly overpowered. But ultimately that's not such a big deal. The Panzer IV line is only a few tanks. There's a lot more tanks in the game, and there's 2 more nations, and you could always choose not to play the Panzer IVs, and you can always choose to play them, and if you're good enough, you could still make them work. But the way they proceeded with the nerf is, to me, is just completely baffling, and just displays how incompetent and how oblivious Gaijin is to their game. What they did is they basically revamped the whole ballistic mechanics in the games, from the way that shells act, the way that they act when they hit armor, the way penetration works, and the way post-penetration effects works. And at that point in time, we were officially, in my opinion, at the lowest point ground forces have ever been in. What they did basically a few months ago is they increased the effectiveness of sloped armor, making it a lot more difficult to penetrate sloped armor. Even if there's a slightest angling on the sloped armor, it would be very hard to actually penetrate it. The shells were prone to bouncing. Another thing they did is they nerfed the post-penetration effects of almost all shells. Now you'd think that would affect every other nation, but no, they buffed the post-penetration effect of high explosive, meaning that all the shells in the game have a higher probability to bounce if they hit sloped armor. But the shells that have a lot of high explosive filler in them will, when they penetrate, do incredible amounts of damage. And the shells, like the most American shells that are just purely AP shells without any high explosive filler, were completely rendered useless because after they would penetrate, they would barely fragment and do anything to the enemy tank. Naturally, after that change, T-34s were just trampling everything that they come across. It was almost impossible to win a match from battle rating 3.7 all the way to 5.7 if you're not on the Russian side, and it was so frustrating that in that frustration spurred the whole idea of Russian bias. That Dark Ages, that mistake that Gaijin made, was the starting point of the idea forming in the community that Gaijin is purposely rigging this game in Russia's favor. A lot of time has passed since then and a lot of things have changed. There were multiple rebalances to the ballistic mechanics, and ultimately Russia, while still being the most dominant nation, isn't trampling over everybody like it used to. There are even a few battle ratings where Russian tanks are not the best tanks on the field, like 5.7 where the Tiger is the king, and 8.0 where the Leopard and soon the Chieftain will definitely give Russians a very hard time. But the damage has unfortunately already been done. The community, including myself, have already lost all faith in Gaijin as a company that can balance the game without being biased towards one nation. And even though this might have not been intentional, then the alternative is even freaking worse. There is a saying in philosophy, never assume malice where stupidity will suffice. The community assumed that Gaijin done this on purpose, that they purposely nerfed all the other nations but Russia so that the Russians can win because they like Russia, where probably, most likely, Gaijin was just too ignorant and too incompetent. The whole team was too incompetent to understand that if they change one such big crucial mechanic, they will make the game less enjoyable for most people because of the things that they have changed. And that, in there, lies my biggest problem with Gaijin and biggest problem with Ground Forces and basically War Thunder in whole. Gaijin constantly makes bad decisions and then never backtracks on them because they assume they know better than us. And in some cases they might do. But in most cases, the community that is actually playing the game, the community as a whole, is a lot of voice and a lot of opinions. And out of those opinions, the good opinions and the bad opinions always get filtered out to the top. And if you take away the bad opinions, like just Russian bias, screaming Russian bias in the wind, the good opinions, the reasonable opinions are probably true. And that is what Gaijin just continually cannot grasp. The only way I can see this changing, this whole situation, and the only way I can see War Thunder improving as a game for a brighter future for the game and not just completely dying, is for Gaijin to understand that sometimes they are wrong and that what they did, the change they made, is not good for the game, but in fact very bad for the game, that they need to change it to something better. And that's what Gaijin fails to understand. They sometimes really don't know what's best for this game, but they stubbornly stick to their decisions for good or worse, most of the times for worse, because like I mentioned earlier, Gaijin does not understand this game like the community does. Well, that's a little bit of a stretch there. The Gaijin just basically doesn't understand this game very well, and in there lies the whole problem that I have with this game, and one of the reasons why I don't play War Thunder as much, and why I don't play Ground Forces, with the exception of the footage for this video, at all. Lastly, I need to talk about the spawning system, but the problem is, when you have an imbalanced game to such degree that one nation is definitely better than all the other nations, it's very hard to have a balanced system, and that is one of the things that I just can't give you an answer for. I don't know how to fix this until Gaijin makes this game somewhat balanced. A new system to a new matchmaking system, maybe get rid of the battle rating system. I really don't know. I am not a person who can know these things. This is for Gaijin to know and for Gaijin to experiment. Like you said, like Gaijin says, like everybody says, this game is still in closed beta. Well, excuse me, not closed beta, in open beta. Yeah, all praise Gaijin. My name has been Soulfax, and I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be no more Ground Forces videos in the future, at least not in the near future. So yeah, I apologize for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. My name has been Soulfax, and I will see you next time.